Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am delighted to be welcoming you here into this room that we are sharing with the National Institute of Art. And I'm really delighted to be welcoming you here in this renovated lecture theatre. And since January 2020, we have not been able to see each other in person. And it is a real pleasure to be welcoming you here today. Please also allow me to welcome everybody have who has joined us online. We introduced this during COVID in order to reach as wide an audience as possible and in multiple languages. This also allows us to work with colleagues from a number of different countries. We've been working with a lot of different topics related to museums, such as the status of collections, reserves, origins, mediation. And this evening we will be talking about a subject on which I must admit I'm fully incompetent. And I know that I am not the only one in this room. This is about artificial intelligence and museums. When I first saw this topic, I thought, what on earth am I going to be able to say about this? I'm going to need support. Perhaps I'm not the right person to do this, but actually, I think we've all been able to seek insight in this topic, and that's what we're actually going to be looking at this evening to help us to understand a topic that is not perhaps understandable at first glance in the heritage sector. If I'm talking about archives, for example, I think we can understand that it's good that we can manage them using artificial intelligence. But when we're talking about museums, it's a little bit more difficult, except for perhaps this notion of archives and being able to get information out of the archives. But there's a lot that we're going to be able to say, and that is the purpose of this evening. So thank you very much to everybody who has been part of the organisation this evening, ICOM France, obviously, and also the INP team, which has worked hard on this. Séverine and Michel as well, who I think will be concluding this evening, Séverine, Blenner-Michel. And I would also like to thank all of our speakers this evening and who will be offering insights on the basis of their function, on their experience, and also projects that they've been leading in these fields, in the digital fields more generally, which has now been extended to this notion of artificial intelligence. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you for joining this evening, whether remotely or in this amphitheatre here this evening. I wish you an excellent evening of work, and I hope that we will all strive together to learn more about these issues of the future. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you, dear Charles Personnaz, and thank you to the teams at the Institut National du Patrimoine, including Séverine, Blenner-Michel, for the organization of this evening. And I would like to thank the auditorium's technical team that is allowing us to lead this event both in person and online. I really am delighted to be here with you for this final ethics debate of the year, which looks at a very contemporary subject that has recently burst into every sphere of our societies. Just a few days ago, we discovered, both you and I, with half enthusiasm and half trepidation, the resurrected voice of John Lennon and the rejuvenated voice of Paul McCartney in Now and Then, written in 1978 by Lennon, thanks to the use of AI, which is now reappearing 53 years after the Beatles split up. This means that artificial intelligence is everywhere. Carré Photo, artificial intelligence invites itself to the International Photography Exhibition. The uses of artificial intelligence makes you dizzy. Scams, this is an important issue. Beware of ads for fake clothes generated by AI. Artificial intelligence, the new cybersecurity challenge. Rendering justice thanks to artificial intelligence. Is artificial intelligence as precise as doctors for identifying a diagnosis? These headlines, the result of a quick web search, give you an idea of the scale of the phenomenon. Between the promise of a better, easier, and richer future and the risk of alienation, misinformation, and dehumanization, or even submersion and overtaking, it is clear how the current public debate is navigating between two waters and how a form of AI mythology is being constructed. And what about our museums? They're obviously affected by this revolution. Some have already given the matter some thought, have tested certain formats and areas of application. Some are hesitating, while others have not yet taken the plunge. So we thought it would be a good idea to spend some time talking about this. What use will or can AI be to us in carrying out our tasks? What can we expect from it? How can it be a reliable and facilitating resource? What are the limits and even the risks? What impact will it have on our business? How can our professions contribute to nurturing and enriching this artificial intelligence? The fields of application are numerous and cover many of the areas of expertise of museums, producing labels, texts, exhibition proposals, assisting in the management of collections, documentation, content, enhancement, communication, financial and administrative management. I would like to thank Marion Carré, founder of Ars Mona, who was recently appointed by the French Minister of Culture to the working group dedicated to the impact of AI in the cultural sector, for agreeing to organise and moderate this evening with ICOM France. I think that we'd have really struggled without her. This evening, thanks to the talks on the programme, we invite you to take a closer look at what AI really is and what it can be used for, but also perhaps to deconstruct the mythology that has been rapidly created in order to better define the contours, possibilities, and limits of AI, while looking at how its eruption into our daily lives can lead to new questions in terms of ethics. In fact, it can be seen as both an asset that strengthens the credibility of museums and a major risk that undermines that credibility. So, how can we make artificial intelligence a tool that serves museums, their quality, and their responsibilities? At a time when our organisation is revising its code of ethics, I have no doubt that this evening will provide some interesting food for thought. And I would like to thank our guests in advance for sharing their thoughts with us based on their past and current experiences. As usual, to wrap up, I'd like to give a sincere thank you to the teams at ICOM France, Anne-Claude Maurice, Alexia Maquinet, and Raphaël Koskas, to the entire ICOM France board and the working group that prepares these evening debates, the translators who, as usual, are providing the simultaneous translation of this evening in English and in Spanish, and Ms. Schwartz and Mr. Michel, who are taking notes of the transcripts of our discussion so that they can be published quickly. I wish you all a pleasant and profitable evening, and I would like to invite our speakers to come up on stage now. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm delighted to be with you this evening for this ethics debate evening on artificial intelligence. I just want to start by giving an overview of what we're going to be talking about this evening. We're going to start with an introduction. I'm going to talk about what artificial intelligence is, what we can do with it, and what are the big major questions that we can ask about it. And then we're going to have a panorama of projects using AI in France and abroad, in which we'll hear from Pierre-Yves Lochon, and then we'll have some feedback from 3 professionals in the cultural sector in France and also in Canada. And then we will really work hard to make sure that we have a time of discussion with all our participants here in the auditorium or online so that we can talk about the different questions which will be potentially raised by these presentations, and also questions that you want to cover around ethics and deontology. And then we will wrap up with a summary from Séverine Blenner-Michel, and then there will be a consultation online in which you will be able to express your opinions about these questions. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. So first of all, in terms of the introduction around what artificial intelligence is, I wanted to start by just having a historical look, because the questions associated with artificial intelligence are rooted in the past, and that's really quite interesting. Of course, I'm not going to give you a history of artificial intelligence. That would be too long, and we're not here for that today. But there's a few interesting historical examples which could help us in terms of the debate that we're going to have. So the first example I was thinking of was the mechanical Turk. I don't know if you've heard of that. The mechanical Turk, which was an automaton invented in the 18th century, and it made it seem that the person could play on chess on their own, and this machine managed to beat Napoleon Bonaparte and other people until it was realized that there was actually a player hidden inside. So why did I talk about this mechanical Turk? Because it was one of the first times that we thought we were faced with a machine that could reason. It was a machine that produced a behavior that looked like a human being and made people panic sometimes. And what we can see now with ChatGPT and faced with artificial intelligence like that, people at the time were already asking some of these sort of questions. Then in terms of artificial intelligence, of course, it's something that's very new, but this term was actually defined in the 1950s. I've put one of the definitions given by Marvin Minsky at the time, who's one of the fathers of artificial intelligence. So since the 1950s, people have been looking to use software programs in order to reproduce intelligent behavior and accomplish what the human brain could accomplish. And since then, we've had a kind of winter of artificial intelligence. So there's been some different periods of decline and disillusionment around the end of the 1960s, at the end of the 80s as well. And then has been a return to the front of the stage over the last decades where we've seen significant technological advances in terms of computing power of machines, but also the amount of data available in order to feed into these machines. And this has now given us these various iterative machines that are available. And it's important to just see this long journey we've been on in terms of artificial intelligence. In the beginning of the 1980s, there was a rediscovery of this whole thing. And here's this illustration of the time when this is what computers looked like when the name artificial intelligence was born. So the only way of communicating with a computer was through a console, and it was primarily about connecting in cables and communicating in this way with machines. But now we can communicate with voice and with human language. So 70 years later, there's been an enormous progress that's been made. I also wanted to talk about another experiment, which will be interesting, which is called the Chinese Room. This was carried out by John Searle in 1980. And just to very briefly explain, it involved someone who did not speak Chinese in the Chinese room, with a number of instructions, grammatical and linguistic instructions, in order to be able to express and speak Chinese. And on the other side of the room, there were people who speak Chinese, and they were able to send communications through the door, and people outside the room, if the person inside followed the rules closely enough, they were persuaded that the person inside the room speaks and understands Chinese, while in reality there's somebody who's manipulating Chinese but doesn't understand at all what's going on. And so this experiment was there to try and show that to what extent it is not possible for artificial intelligence to have a real consciousness. And this is really relevant today around all the questions around text generative artificial intelligence, because sometimes we can be really impressed by the way that they manipulate language, but we need not to forget that the fact that they are manipulating the language, but they don't understand anything at all about it. And this is what this Chinese room experiment shows us. So we hear a lot about the fact that this has been a poorly chosen word, a poorly chosen term, artificial intelligence, and it's created something of the mythology that we've talked about earlier. I like this kind of Russian doll presentation of what artificial intelligence is, because it's a very general term which includes a number of different terms. So there's the family of machine learning, which is the ability of machines to learn and to be trained. And then there's also deep learning, which is something that's more specific. And artificial intelligence is really a group of varied techniques, which is to do with interpreting text. You can see this here with natural language processing, but also with speech, also vision and recognizing images. So this is a very brief overview, as it were, but we need to understand there's a whole varied range of techniques here, which are all put into this term, this umbrella term of artificial intelligence. If I come to generative artificial intelligence, that's what we've been particularly focused on recently. And the primary way that they operate is that there are huge data sets. So you can see on this diagram, this can be text, images, speech, sound, or a whole range of other things, which are used to train foundation models. And these are very big models which are trained, and they have a number of different parameters. They're trained with data, and they serve different applications. And what I find interesting here in terms of generative artificial intelligence is that there are two layers. There's the model layer, the foundation model layer, and then over that there's the application layer. And these two layers are very interesting because the foundation models are produced and held by a very small number of primarily American companies, and that's of course raises questions of digital sovereignty, even though there are French and European players who are getting involved in these areas. But all of the applications and everything that can be done out of these foundation models are very varied indeed. So you've got a few examples here. We can do a very wide range of things. So now if we start to think perhaps more concretely, even though we're going to hear more detailed presentations later on, I wanted just to show what we can produce with generative artificial intelligence. So the first thing, we were talking about ChatGPT in the introduction. Of course, we can generate text. ChatGPT is not the only one. There's Bard and Claude and other terms as well, and other applications as well. What's interesting about text generation is that we often ask questions expecting true responses, and that's certainly not going to be true because the databases are not up to date for ChatGPT. It's up the 1st of January 2022, but the latest update for their databases. But it's interesting to see what the result is. So here's an example that was done on descriptions, plates for different works of art in museums, or we could ask questions for suggestions in terms of what we could post on social media or things like that. If we feed our own data in, we can then do a lot of things with this kind of these text generation tools. But we shouldn't necessarily expect accurate information. Then in terms of image generation, there's a number of different tools that you might have tried that make it possible to generate images. So I asked for a beautiful picture example of what would be happening in a museum. And so I did this using Stability. And this gives you an idea of what can be done with in terms of images. It's also possible to generate sound. What's interesting in terms of sound, as opposed to text and images, you'll see in a minute I've produced a special example here. The quality is not as good, and this is because the data sets are less present. That's because we have lots of image and lots of text, but actually not many people have the vocabulary necessary for annotating music. So perhaps we could listen to a music piece here. So the example that you've heard here is a music generated by prompt, which we're going to see here on the slide. It's keeping on playing. And so what I asked was inspiring piano music to be played when visiting a museum. So this is an example of generation of sound from a prompt. Of course, the examples that we mentioned in the introduction, we've tried work on speech, etc. And there's things that are interesting to do in terms of music, but in terms of generative tools, we've not really got something that's really of a very good quality yet. In terms of speech, we have tools that can generate voices and clone voices. I took a video accessible on YouTube in which I'm speaking, and I put it into 11 labs from a 2-minute video that I put on YouTube, and I asked it to read a text with my voice. This is what it gave.
Bonsoir, je suis ravie d'être parmi vous pour ce café-débat déontologie autour de l'intelligence artificielle et des musées.
So you hear the sound. It was a little bit robotic, but that's my voice. And it just came from a 2-minute video that I fed into the model. So this raises questions about the capacity that other people, what other people could do with my voice. And then we can also generate videos. So I put a video example here, which can be just shown while I'm speaking. And I asked for a video of my dream where I was walking in the painting of Van Gogh's painting, The Starry Night. And when I asked it to produce that, it gave me the video that we can see here. So it's a very short video extract, but just to show you that these are turnkey tools that are available, and I didn't need to do any programming in order to do this. And this is where generative artificial intelligence is really changing things. Because before we had to be able to have programming skills in order to manipulate these tools, but now anyone can access this, and that's really what's changing the approach. And then I give you an example in terms of data analysis. So this is a very rapid example. There's data on open data in terms of annual visitor numbers in a museum. And I asked for a prediction of visitor numbers at the Louvre over the coming years on the basis of a linear regression model. And very quickly, it gave me these kind of statistics. I haven't really checked the results too much, but this just shows that there are also tools available for analyzing data, and we can use them as well for manipulating data. So the key issues that we're going to talk a lot about this evening, I think, and I think we'll perhaps cover some others too, but the key aspects, I think, are to do with the use of cultural data, whether upstream in how we can use cultural data to train these models, and what are the opportunities and what are the risks and limits associated with this, particular ethical limits that we perhaps need to set ourselves. But there's another aspect as well in terms of the use of artificial intelligence to enrich the corpuses of cultural data, and we'll talk about that later. That's an opportunity perhaps in terms of new uses. What new uses would make it possible for would the use of artificial intelligence enable in museums? I think there's an American museum that's put in place a charter for the way in which AI should be used, and this is a question that needs to be thought through in terms of what the ethical limits are. And then there's a question of impact on our professions. I haven't thought too much about the aspect linked to creators, but in terms of the know-how and professions that are impacted by AI, what would they be? What would the gains in productivity be? What would the threats and the limits would be? And also, how should we train and support changes around these things? And finally, there are social and cultural issues, which I think would be interesting to touch on, is the role of museums in the support of the social changes associated with AI, since museums are places where we can learn, but also we could talk about the way in which AI can help museums deal with a number of different issues linked to institutions and how these tools can contribute. So that's a very quick overview of artificial intelligence. I'm now going to hand over to Pierre-Yves Lochon, who's going to give us a panorama of different projects using AI in France and abroad. Just to very briefly introduce Pierre-Yves Lochon, he's the Associate Director of Sinapses Conseils and the Administrator of Clic France, which is for the Club of Innovation and Culture. So he uses a number of digital tools and practices in museums and cultural venues. Pierre-Yves Lochon is also a lecturer at the Franco-Chinese Institute of Arts Management and the Shanghai Central Academy of Fine Arts.
Thank you so much for this excellent introduction. Thank you so much also to the ICOM France team and to Marion for this excellent invitation here today. And thank you to everybody who is here in person in the room with us and anyone listening online as well. Marion Carré asked me to tell you the history of artificial intelligence in the cultural sector, more particularly in the museum experience. So I'm trying to present this from the perspective of the visitor in about 6-minute time. It's not going to be exhaustive, obviously, but I'm going to give you 4 uses of artificial intelligence in the transformation of the museum experience. I will be illustrating this through some examples from France and across the world. So the short history of artificial intelligence in museums can start with the following date, April 2017. This is not to contradict what Marion said. This is when we were first able to see a Ask Mona chatbot for cultural recommendation in France. So it started outside of museums themselves for preparation of the visit. Ask Mona is a startup that shared its expertise and its talent for museum exhibitions and cultural venues in order to integrate onto their website a number of tools. So conversational tools such as chatbots, but this is what we had on the SNCF website previously, for instance. So the idea was to introduce a chatbot into museum life. This chatbot answered questions from the public or helped with bookings. And the same year in 2017, artificial intelligence, particularly chatbots, came into American museums, not for visit preparation, but for mediation directly. And with a few months difference in South America, particularly at Buenos Aires and Sao Paulo, there were 2 uses at the Museum of Modern Art and the Pinakothek, where visitors were able to use their smartphones to access the chat box within museums themselves. This has not ceased since then to be a mediation tool in France. This has helped in exhibitions such as Expression Rouge at the Grand Palais. More recently, there was the Louis Vuitton Foundation that used it as well. And sometimes chat boxes can be used in permanent exhibitions at the Centre Pompidou and Pompidou Metz, for instance, or more recently in the museum and garden of Albert Kahn? So, continuing with the topic of mediation, I'm going to talk about three different initiatives outside of France, actually, which are examples for me of what artificial intelligence can do in terms of mediation. So, one experiment which is presented as the Shazam of art. This was a startup in 2017 from the UK, actually. So the aim is to become the Shazam of art. So to be the database that could be used as Shazam is used. So Shazam is used to identify music that you're hearing in the street or on the radio, for instance. So it's been working with over 700 cultural organizations, 2 million works, and 3.5 million users in the world. Another example of mediation is perhaps old now in the history of artificial intelligence in museums is DALL-E Lives. So this is in the DALL-E Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. And this is now no longer a chatbot. It's a little bit more elaborated version of artificial intelligence with a deepfake. So DALL-E is embodied, reincarnated, if you like, through artificial intelligence. So I'm going to show you a video in English that explains the process of DALL-E Lives in Florida.
Greetings. I am Salvador Felipe Jacinto Dalí y Domenech, and I am back.
Even though DALL-E's been gone for 30 years, we're using artificial intelligence to bring him back today. In order to actually train this AI to reproduce DALL-E's likeness, we've started with finding the right footage of DALL-E, and then we split that up into frames where he's looking the right way, and we pick the best frames to use for training from that. Our system learns exactly what he looks like and how his mouth moves and how his eyes move and his eyebrows and every little detail about what makes DALL-E DALL-E.
This is actually a recreated version of DALL-E. It's not a person playing DALL-E with makeup. It is actually DALL-E. We're very careful to use his words so that you learn a lot about what he thought and the way he thought.
People want access to art. They want a way in. It can be through technology, through learning about the artist.
Greetings. Welcome.
This technology allows people to imagine for a moment that there is such a thing as immortality, to see DALL-E alive again.
So here we see DALL-E coming back to life. Over 300,000 visitors have experienced this to date. Through the experience, they're able to take a selfie with DALL-E as well. And to push the deepfake nature of this, later, every single day, the sequence is opened up with this, with the local news and the cover of the Tampan newspaper. So the experience is updated every single day to make it even more lifelike. Another use as a mediation tool that I would like to present is now in history rather than in art. This is an experience that I really like. This is about using AI to present historic information on two topics, enslavement, so slavery, and the Holocaust, to talk about how these topics can be poorly managed in social media. And now AI is being used to promote this through a hologram and interaction. In 2 American museums, there are dialogues with witnesses in the form of a hologram, and they're able to ask questions to the hologram and hear them respond. Let's move over now to a new way of using AI and to have it used by members of the public. This is where it's used as a promotion tool for collections. So I would like to start with an experience that I really like because it's very simple. This is the San Francisco MoMA that launched this in July 2017. There's a special number that sends an SMS to you. So you send a text message after you've sent a word, and then they send back a work and a short description. The aim is to promote the collection and to disseminate it. So a lot of experience has been carried out in this field. So in 2019, the Met Museum, Microsoft and the MIT organized an impact study to identify how to better capitalize on AI. And there have been other experiences to explore collections in different ways. So the Museo del Prado, for instance, and the Denmark Museum as well. We can also use AI to build relationships. This may seem strange, not always historical or true links, but it can be built between different museums. For instance, the MIT and the Met and the Rijksmuseum. There's not necessarily many links between these 2 aspects, but the links that there are have been able to be found by artificial intelligence. Another experiment was in India with museums in the US, the UK, and the Paris Textile Museum. I like this idea of AI as a tool for promoting collections. So if you look at Art Lens at the Cleveland Museum of Art, for instance, they've been working in this field. And the final example of a collection promotion is something launched in November 2022. This consists in allowing artists to seek inspiration from the MoMA Museum, so the Museum of Modern Art of New York, and to transform this collection and data in this collection into a generative art installation. This has become an exhibition which has been presented from November 2022 to October 2023. I'll be showing you video after this. This experiment is part of the museum collection, and it's come back to the collection now as this work of art has now been acquired by the MoMA, and it has now become a part of the collection itself. Here you can see it. This is a generative artwork. So generative AI, generative art at the same time, which is constantly transforming in one of the museum rooms. And we've had some artists are very involved in this. So I'm going to move to the gift shop now, because visits often end in the gift shop with a 4th illustration of what we're capable of doing with AI. Since June 2023, Ask Mona has created a smart magnet that allows this to be linked to ChatGPT, so that then the entire life of some famous figures such as Joan of Arc, Van Gogh, Francis I, and soon a number of other people such as Monet as well. Thank you very much. We are now going to hand over to Agnès Abastado. You have been working for 13 years on digital projects now, and since February 2022, you've been Deputy Digital Director, and we're going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about a project that we've got alongside the Van Gogh exhibition at which is currently at the Musée d'Orsay. Do I need to launch the presentation on PowerPoint? So I've just got a few pictures really just to give you an idea of the project. So this is a project called Bonjour Vincent. It's a generative AI project focused on behavior and is interested in the behavior of human beings, and it tries to reproduce the behavior and language of human beings. It's a project that is led by a startup called Jumbo Mana and has worked together with a historian called Victor van der Waterbin, who is a specialist in this kind of project. We haven't funded this, we're just a partner of the project. It was funded by EP France and the big East region together with Paris-Saclay Université, and it's a project focused on behavioral artificial intelligence. So here's just some images from the exhibition, but in practical terms, it's this terminal here that you can see on the image here, and it's presented at the end of the exhibition, and it gives you the opportunity to dialogue with Van Gogh and to enter into a dialogue and a discussion with the artist. What's really interesting in this project, because we were saying earlier that artificial intelligence needed to be based on content, on data, and the reason researchers selected Van Gogh is because, as you might know, Van Gogh wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters that have all been conserved and have now all been digitized and are available online as Van Gogh letters, and it's what was used to train this model. And what was particularly interesting in terms of this behavioral AI project is that we're trying to get as close as possible to the personality of Van Gogh. We're not only working with the research work focused on the artist, but we're going to the very source of his own letters that he wrote himself. The project, there's a button, and you press the button, and then you ask a question, and then Van Gogh thinks and answers based on what's the input of his data from these letters. It's a way of exploring a database, but with a much more natural approach involving questions and answers, and with a much less austere approach than just reading through his letters, which is not entirely straightforward. It's also really interesting in terms of cultural mediation, because there's a kind of reversed approach where visitors come and ask a question. There's no presupposition of the answer that spectators or visitors want. The visitors ask their question and Van Gogh answers. So in our museum, we are a partner of this project. We present it to our audiences, and it's been really important for us to explain what it is. It's not an artifact. It's not a cultural mediation artifact that's integrated into the exhibition. It's something that's really alongside the exhibition. It's an experiment, really, that we're offering our visitors, and it gives us the opportunity to create a link between art, our collections, research, and visitors. And through us, this project goes from academic research to applied research. This is something that's really important to explain to visitors, and that's what we do, because this is a learning project, and there might be errors. We talked about this in the introduction. The legitimacy of museums when we present this kind of project is something to really be very clear about, because artificial intelligence might have been well trained and followed by all kinds of specialists, but there can be things in it that we're not 100% sure about. what's also really interesting is the fact that beyond the research work and presenting it to our visitors is that there's been a lot of interest from our internal teams, particularly our cultural mediation teams, but also the scientific teams, to say there are questions I would really like to ask Van Gogh, and I'm really interested to know what he would say. And so even us as professionals, we've been really interested by this. And it's been interesting to challenge our knowledge on a specific area. Perhaps just to wrap up in terms of the presentation of this project, here we're talking about artificial intelligence for mediation. We've talked a bit about the limits of it. This is a research project. What's also been interesting is the change of posture, as it were. And I think it's really important to see this as an experimental project for the moment. We're going to have a lot of work to do after this with the startup to analyze the questions that have been asked, how it's been used, and all of that is data that would really help us to understand our visitors and to see what their appetite is for this kind of project. Thank you very much. There's a few minutes left. Would you like to just talk to us about what you can observe from the way this is being used? So visitors are very curious about it in terms of the way they interact with the terminal. I feel like the questions tend to be the same questions. There are a lot of questions focused around the favorite painting. Van Gogh's favorite painting is perhaps the key question that comes out. But it would really be interesting to have a look at and a deeper analysis of the questions that have been asked. It creates curiosity. People often ask 3 or 4 questions. They don't spend an hour with it either. It's true that there's nowhere that's very comfortable to sit. You're standing in front of it and you've just finished the exhibition, so you've already had a good time in the museum and you've finished the exhibition. So we're really just in an experimental phase here, and it's a little early yet to really draw any conclusions, but it's interesting for us in terms of the digital media cultural mediation team to test this project. And it's also really interesting to see the visitors interacting with these new technologies within the Musée d'Orsay and trying these different tools. We're wanting to present contemporary things while explaining them very quickly. We were never going to integrate this as a completed cultural mediation tool, at least not for the moment, not until we've properly experimented with it. And the timing meant that we didn't really have a preliminary phase that where we could trial it properly. So we wanted to present it, but in this way, in this experimental way. And so we could see this very detailed visual with some really detailed instructions. And you talked about the link between academic research and applied research and how that is working for you. How were you able to help people use the terminal with these very clear instructions? Yes, we have 2 information boards next to the terminal. One of them explains that this is a research project and where the funding comes from and how it all works, and explains the context of the project. And the other one gives really practical information about using the terminal. And we do that because it's an experimental project. We're working with a startup who've come up with this simple terminal, and the goal isn't, it's not a terminal that's really suited to about 8,000 visitors coming through testing it. And in the first weeks, we realized there were some sort of equipment issues where the microphone wasn't focused in the right direction, and people took it in their hands and then it turned off, and then people were having to press the buttons and that didn't quite work. So there were quite a lot of interface issues. And in discussing with the startup, which is not a specialist in cultural mediation, we had to just work on a number of these and iron the bugs out at the beginning. Thank you very much. So that's initial feedback in terms of mediation focused on a live project that's currently operating now. That's really very interesting. Thank you very much. Now we're going to hand over to Thomas Sagory, who's going to talk to us about collections and the use of AI for collections. So Thomas Sagory, you're the head of digital development and of production for the Grands Sites Archéologiques collection for the French Ministry of Culture. So if you want to look at archaeology.culture.gouv.fr, you can see what he's doing. So you have 1 foot in the museum and 1 foot on the ground. You contribute to a number of different research products in France and abroad. And so over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity that you have given me to share what we are doing at the National Archaeology Museum. We're going to be focusing today on matters related particularly to artificial intelligence. So yes, artificial intelligence and its projects are part of a broader issue linked to the deployment of a digital strategy at the National Archaeology Museum. We've had over 150 years of existence of this museum now, and we believe that this digital strategy is part of the strategies that we launched in the late 19th century when we opened. Yes, we have current limits. We have a scientific and cultural project that I invite you to consult, which the director of the museum has fully renewed this year. We're working hard on this at the moment. It's an opportunity to explore, experiment, and help us to look forward to the future of our museum. We're trying to fully renew our visitor exhibitions as well, particularly the permanent exhibitions that you've been able to visit. Around a quarter of our visitors are school children, and we are currently closed for renovations. And we're also doing significant work on our collections at the moment, with conditioning and externalization of the majority of our reserves based on within the grounds of the chateau, which has become a museum. So to give you an idea of the number of objects, we have around 3 million, even though it is very difficult to get a precise number, as this is a real collection, and you can have thousands of associated objects linked to a single object. So our objectives are the following. We want to promote the collections, the museum, the chateau, and the national domain. So there's this desire to link all of this in. The National Archaeological Museum needs to be placed in their the objects within this museum need to be placed within their original context with regard to the original site and all of the knowledge that that can entail, as well with the implementation of digital tools via different channels in the exhibitions, online, of course, during events. Inside the museum, we have a virtual reality visit as part of the Necker Children's Hospital, which allows them to discover UNESCO objects and objects in our collection, and a desire to create links by promoting virtual reality visits. So this is the context for artificial intelligence. 2017 was a key year for us where artificial intelligence appeared for us as well. So one of the highlights of the Archaeological Museum is that there is a photographic studio that has developed expertise in photography and also in 3D digitization. I'll be showing you an example of this. 3D digitization includes a number of different methodologies, depending on the typology and the complexity of the objects that we're conserving. This was an important strategic focus for us, and it's unique. This is a real strength. There are fewer and fewer photography studios integrated inside museum, and it allows us to promote research and development around 3D digitization. And we often use artificial intelligence increasingly in this. So in 2017, there were the first discussions around these issues under a call for projects under the French Ministry of Culture, and the initiative of a startup called Affluence for predictive analysis of visits. The idea was to combine data from visitor numbers in previous years with data analysis, as we saw in the introduction, but also a calendar that was school, political, weather related, in order to have proposed visitor numbers, forecasted visitor numbers. And this is something that's quite well used now across a number of different cultural and sporting institutions. This has become a tool developed and deployed. Currently, the approach encourages editorialization of content. So we're moving outside of artificial intelligence here to be in a more editorial dynamic, which needs to be more developed. In the following years, we were able to work on this data, particularly through a European project under the H2020 program on the fight against the traffic of cultural goods. This is called Provision. And the purpose of this project was to facilitate links between data conserved in tools, specialist tools, in order to work with people on the front line, such as policemen, to give them information and expertise, as they have a very quick analysis of the objects in front of them. We worked on this project over a number of years on different aspects. We provided data and organized an object recognition workshop on the 30th of September 2021. You can see on the table objects corresponding to a number of typologies of objects on the art market. And we've developed a mobile application with a warning system in order to give a clearer overview. The aim is also to work with experts in the subject. In teaching now, in this project, we didn't see the technical issues emerging so much as we're able to implement programs to overcome them. The obstacle for the development of this kind of tool is the quality and structuration of our data. There's a kind of responsibility as a cultural institution, and we're really in the back office of our institutions here. We have this responsibility. We ask ourselves what the purpose is of databases that are well structured. We associate them with research needs. Here is a very concrete need, a concrete use that goes well beyond this in order to help fight the trafficking of cultural goods with these documents that are very well documented now, in order to supplement poorly documented aspects. Throughout these years, we were able to also discuss the implementation of a chatbot at the National Archaeology Museum. We would like to do this to give some support to our cultural development team, as they've been working with Van Gogh projects and have had daily questions on this. We'd like to free up some time for them so that they can concentrate on more specific missions. There are also matters of constraints. The National Archaeological Museum has a national competence with reduced resources currently. We've not yet managed to bring out a chatbot, but hopefully discussions will continue. To go back to 3D digitization now, like I was saying earlier, this is where AI has really been developing. I took the case of the site of the Rocs aux Sorciers, which is a Magdalenian sculptured cover, which was around 14,000 years ago. There's a sculptured ceiling with engravings that's collapsed, and this was along a riverbed. This is a technique that's quite rare, to have both the sculpture and the engraving together. This is essentially in France, and the Roc aux Sorciers is the most beautiful example we have of this. And the ceiling of this had collapsed after occupations in the Paleolithic periods, and it has been broken into around 1,000 fragments conserved in the National Archaeological Museum. So curators and people working on this site, archaeologists, over many years have been trying to reconstitute this ceiling. This is a usual practice that a number of museums have to try and do, reconstituting fragments. Sometimes we have 1.5 to 2 meter long fragments where we have to use a lens in order to take a picture, which struggles to get from one side to the other. And the recognition of image on the basis of smaller surfaces are not very easy. We've got gaps as well, because this is archaeology. So we need to reconstitute something when we're lacking pieces in this large puzzle. It's quite difficult. So we've been trying to articulate this work around a PhD project by Marie-Morgane Poumard called Archipels 3D. And Marie-Morgane Poumard has developed a process of artificial intelligence with a learning system working on imaging issues. You can see some screenshots on the left-hand side. This was at the very start of the project. And there's also a semantic component to this. What I mean by this is that we're trying to ask these machines to understand that there are a lot of different elements on these freezers with specific components, about 4 or so to the bottom of the screen, in order the ibexes, in order to reconstitute these aspects. This project is now part of the Future Investment Project in France with 3D data. The calculating computing capacity that you need to have thousands of 3D digitized blocks. I'm sure that you can imagine, with the correlating surface areas, etc. This is huge. We've begun work on this. There have been a number of acquisition campaigns since September and over the summer before that as well. This project is now going to be extended. We are also working under another PhD project supported in Toulouse, connected with the Toulouse Archaeological Centre, on changes to digitization protocols, particularly for fine engravings. At the top, you can see fragments from large caves, for instance. But often prehistory has very fine engraving, which can sometimes be very difficult to see by the human eye. So the modeling and recognition protocols for this are very interesting for research, for documentation of collections, and in the long run also for mediation. I'm talking about the first stage in the chain here, but the idea is to be able to produce data that's structured very well so that we can then share this in mediation systems. The purpose of this project under development is to work on the development of an open source software for modeling for photometric stereo. This is called Meshroom. And there's some feedback between this very specific field and the possibility of developing digital tools drawing on open source data. In another project now, the photometric stereo photogram protocols are working for the vast majority of the archaeological corpus, but there are a number of objects outside of this where digitization is extremely complex or even impossible and leads to the production of 3D models that perhaps don't have the acceptable level of quality. This is what I was talking about earlier with regard to our museum's long history. Sometimes the words used can be quite complex, but the National Archaeological Museum are working with molds at the moment, like we did at the start when we opened. At the time, people did this for research, for documentation, for mediation, sometimes for exchanges between museums as well. But we can see that given the history of collections, looking back over these molds, it can sometimes have a heritage value if the original is destroyed for a number of reasons, whether natural or human. If you think of conflicts, for instance, these cast molds can have a heritage value in themselves. That 3D creation, reproduction needs to be as faithful to the original as possible. And this is something that we've been working on. So this project is for the acquisition of shiny objects. So here you can see coins, money, bracelets, etc., which is very difficult to digitize in 3D. We've been working under a ministerial convention and INRIA for a project that was initially on textile. We're hoping to transform this now in order to digitize shiny objects, such as this Tayak treasure that you can see on the screen. It's currently dispersed for collection reasons, and the idea is to bring it together for collection reasons, for heritage reasons. There's going to be a longer project after this where we're going to try to bring these objects into this dome and to have a portable prototype produced that will be able to be added to the museum collections. We are working on these two levels, and artificial intelligence is involved on uncertainty of measure. So for glossy, shiny objects, there's going to be high levels of uncertainty during the digitization, and AI is going to be integrated into this process in order to have reliable and precise models that will be useful for research and also for mediation, and then integrating them into the more classic 3D data production processes. Thank you very much for this experience feedback, which shows you working with multidisciplinary projects and teams. I'm now going to hand over to someone who is joining us from Quebec online. There is a 6-hour time difference, I believe. This is Marie-Hélène Raymond. Good morning, good afternoon, and you will be talking to us about AI in service of mediation. You are coordinator of the digital strategy for the Musée National des Beaux-Arts du Québec. You are working on deployment of the digital strategy at the museum and working on a number of creative digital projects. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Before introducing the project, I just want to say I'm really looking forward to talking together because we had a new project, an enormous project on our collections, which was commissioned by the Ministry of Culture. And I've shared in the chat, if you're interested, you might be interested in the work that we've done on 3D work. I think someone's got a microphone open, I'm afraid. I think there's a microphone that needs to be turned off in the room. Thank you. So that was just a mention, just in terms of what we've just heard about. We also have a lot of information around collections as what we could share. So I want to talk about the chatbot from our museum, the Musée National des Beaux-Arts du Québec. Thank you, Marion, for this invitation to talk about this project, and thank you to ICOM and everyone for organizing it and bringing it together. So perhaps just a few words about the Quebec National Fine Arts Museum before going on to the project itself. Perhaps we could change slide and you could see a picture of our institute. So we have the largest collection of Quebec works from the 17th up, dating from the 17th century. We've got 42,000 works. We are based in Quebec, which is the capital of Quebec, here in Canada, close to the Plains of Abraham. So we have a very interesting position between urban areas and the nature. So that's just to give you an idea. Next, in the next slide, I present our chatbot, and Marion was talking about this. Marion talked about deep learning early on, because we learn a lot, actually, in a very deep way through a project like this. So in the next slide, you'll be able to see the vision that we have for our chatbot. What we want is for it to be to express the fact that we're an open and welcoming museum, which gives visitors a rich and personalized experience. So the chatbot is there to welcome visitors as they arrive, and it gives them an itinerary and trail based on their experiences, and it guides them through the museum. And so the chatbot helps us to discover the works through active observation. It makes it possible to appreciate the works with different approaches, a factual and historical approach, also approaches based on emotion and well-being, or more of a philosophical approach. Which is something that's also we put an emphasis on in our museum. We heard from Pierre-Yves earlier about tools that respond to people's moods, and that's something we'd quite like to do. We'd like to be able to offer trails or itineraries that help you to improve your mood, or help you to relax, or other aspects. Our target visitors are mainly people who are visiting museums alone, who are interested in getting to understand art, who are curious but don't know where to start. Often it's for people who already know the museum but want to experience it differently, because these are permanent collections that are not renewed monthly or even annually. So this is a way of experiencing works in the museum. It's also for people who want to personalize their tour and personalize their experience. So we often talk about experience, perhaps rather than a tour or a trail, but it's important to personalize experiences. Also, this tool is for people who want to be supported and accompanied in an innovative and original way. In the next slide, you can see the method that we used to put this in place. So we wanted to make sure that the tool was going to be desirable and usable. And so we looked at what we heard, from the previous speaker about the desire of visitors to use this Van Gogh tool or not. So we were basically wanting to find out whether we should really go for this or not. Were visitors really interested in what we were doing? Because we might think it's really cool, but perhaps visitors might think otherwise. So we really wanted to put users at the center of what we're thinking, and we had this design thinking approach, and also use the agile method at the heart of this project. And we are learning as a museum team to adapt and to correct our approach as we go. You will see that I put in a little quote from Confucius on the next slide, which says, "Learn all you can from the mistakes of others. You won't have time to make them all yourself." I think it's important to remember that, not only as we're sharing this ourselves, because you might learn from our mistakes as we share it with you. Next slide. And there I'm going to present the chronology of this project. So for phase one, so we talk about iteration and agility, but we've developed some important phases which gave us quick wins, as it were. And all of this began in winter 2022, although the voice of art which was presented, which Pierre-Yves was talking about earlier, that sort of sowed an idea in our thinking back in 2017 or so, because we thought it would be good to really work on something like this because we were really impressed by it. So in 2022, when we started meeting other museums who developed chatbots or mobile applications, we met people from the Sao Paulo Pinacoteca who had a really amazing subsidy from IBM. We were going to need more of a budget if we wanted to do something as amazing as they did, but we had the opportunity to talk with them, and it was really helpful. We also talked with other museums in Quebec, in Canada, and in the US. And in the summer of 2022, we did some observation analysis exercise in terms of the behavior of our visitors. The team members, or the members of the chatbot team, went round the museum to different places, into a particular entrance or a different pavilion, to perhaps key points where people move from one pavilion to another and don't know quite where to go. And so we found ourselves trying to observe to what extent would a chatbot help people to use the museum in a more fluid way. And we took a lot of notes. And we, on the basis of those observations and the identification of needs, because we wanted chatbots to respond to needs. And on the basis of all of this, in 2022, we checked budget and our specifications, and we chose an external partner which was currently working with traditional chatbot technology at the time. We took part in autumn 2022 to develop a database and create didactic content. It was really the old styled approach, really, rather than machine learning and putting in place discussions and things. So it was a proof of concept that really required a lot of time and energy from the team. And in winter of 2023, we validated the functions used, and coming back to the question of the appetite and the interest, really, for the chatbot among our target audience. And then we called on all the members of our museum, and hundreds of them responded. We had 3 members who came to the museum and put in place 3 groups. In the end, we had 78 people over 3 days, 72 members, 60 of them were over 55, and 94% of them did this experiment alone. So this was our target audience, perhaps a little bit older than we would have liked, but this is nevertheless the core. These are the core visitors of our museum. So we tested with the tablet to avoid people downloading a different version on their telephone and having a different telephone with a lower quality technology. At least if we gave them the tablet, everyone would have the same tablet, and that would give us some good results straight away. We gave verbal explanations of the project, by the team. We did some tests in the exhibition rooms in front of the works, and we had a technical support where it was needed, where people wanted to talk about how they could interact with the chatbot, because whether it would be by text or by vocal prompts. And then people responded to a questionnaire of 33 questions in order to give feedback. And then we can see here are some of the results. 9 out of 10 people felt that they had learned something. So that gave us some good feedback already. The chatbot was useful. 8 out of 10 people wanted to do the experience again with other works. Because as I said, since we had to develop all the conversations and plan answers for all questions, we only developed this for a single work initially. So this was the prototype. 7 out of 10 people said that this made them want to come back to the museum, and half would have preferred to have a headset in order to listen, because there were a lot of people speaking to the tablet at the same time, and it was a bit of a cacophony. But this was something that was very easy to resolve technically. So here's the results in terms of quality. So this is the fact that people said they would like to have, the advantage was that they would have answers when there was no guide available. It made it possible to ask questions without there being a human being in the room. It also made it possible to have specific information aligned with their interests, so people could personalize their experience in this way and get answers with regard to the artists and the approach. There could be more open questions, more conversation, more appreciation of art, and more information about the museum as required. It gave people the desire to spend more time with the works. You love museums, you work in museums. We prioritize slow art because the time that people are taking to observe a work of art is reducing over the years. So taking time to look at a work and observe it and ask questions, all of that is really very interesting from our perspective. It also made it possible for people to feel free to ask any question, because there's no bad question when you're talking to a robot. There's no useless question. There's nothing that's embarrassing. And sometimes talking with a guide can be intimidating. And it also offers new opportunities for asking questions and thinking things through. It created a connection with the work and helped to understand the work. In terms of the comments that we received, a lot of people said that it was really no hesitation in talking to a robot. People said that they spent more time in front of the work than they would have done on their own. People said the idea is excellent. This is a very promising technology which needs to be improved. Of course, it was a prototype, and people said that they would prefer a guided tour, but the chatbot gives that opportunity to ask questions and to spend time discovering a work. Because sometimes when you do a guided tour, you need to keep moving on when you actually want to spend more time. So with all that, what did we do in terms of phase 2? In spring 2023, after the tests, we relaunched the project with another team, another partner, Ask Mona. Hi, Marion. And we shared the results of what we'd done. And I haven't talked too much about this, but I just want to say that our museum, which is a huge block of concrete with a whole number of different layers, we had a map of it that wasn't really very detailed. So we decided that we wanted to develop a system that used ChatGPT and control data and made it possible to use experimental data. So it's just interesting to see in just 1 year, there was a move from machine learning to generative AI. In just 1 year, the technology improved enough for us to develop a new prototype, an alpha version, which was much simpler for us to improve and develop with new experiments, because it can develop answers very simply rather than us having to write out all of the text, and that helped us a great deal. And in winter, we're going to put in place the new functions, and we'll run a new series of tests very soon. You'll see in the next slide that we have been working with Ask Mona on 3 works from the collection. These works that are present in our collections. You can see on top right a work from Marc-Aurèle Fortin, and then there's the Coquelicon by Jean Dallaire and the SCAR project by Nadia Amir. So we started with those 3 works with visual recognition software to develop the content, and then a interface with an adaptive web page, responsive web page, and then the use of text supplied by the museum to feed into the AI model, but also the Wikipedia page that the museum keeps up to date. But however, for this first phase, it was only for keyboard chat and not vocal chats. But what we want to do is to, in the future, maintain the history of the conversation, make it possible to begin the conversation again. Sometimes people run out of questions to ask the constant conversation, the chatbot, and so sometimes they could do with help and prompts to ask the right kind of questions. And also, we're hoping to be able to make it possible to come back to the beginning of the conversation, make connections with works in the collection. So with 42,000 works, of course, in the museum, it's going to be a tiny proportion that we're going to be able to integrate into this. So perhaps it'll be possible during the conversation to make suggestions to the visitors to go and see other works, including works that have been digitized with 3D techniques that I was mentioning earlier. And then we're hoping also to have hoping to have different trails available, whether with a philosophical focus or more of a factual process. And then we're hoping to have voice recognition, because most people use these kind of applications with VoIP application tools. So I've tried to rush through in order so that we could have enough time for questions. So please don't hesitate if you've got any questions. You'll see on the last slide, there's my contact details, and please do get in touch to talk further about this, because I'd really love to do that. Please don't hesitate. Thank you very much, Marie-Hélène. So that's the end of these 3 sessions with operational feedback, as it were. Thank you for all that you've shared. So now we're going to have a time for discussion. We've got just under 40 minutes, and what we really want is for this discussion to allow questions about what's just been presented, but we also wanted to go further to dialogue together around the ethical issues associated with this, the opportunities, the limits raised by artificial intelligence within this museum context. So to get us started with discussion, I'm just going to ask a question, and then please do get involved and respond to what's been said by different people. Of course, I have other questions if you run out of ideas, but first of all, I just wanted to ask with whether among the participants, either here in the auditorium or online, there are other people who wanted to talk to us and share feedback of the use of artificial intelligence, either internally within their teams. We've talked quite a lot here about use within connections, but we've talked a lot about visitors and the use of these tools in terms of visitors. But if you've got things that you've been doing internally within your teams, or other uses perhaps that you've developed with visitors, please do speak. I think we've got a microphone in the room, and if you're online and you want to open your microphone and speak, please do. Please do, as long as you don't all do it at the same time.
Nobody peers to be jumping on that question. Perhaps we don't have any other feedback. Oh, yes, there is somebody in the room. I'm listening. I have a question. This isn't feedback. I don't know if I'm doing this in the right order, if I can ask my question now. Yes, over to you. I wondered about the implementation of the overall experience, which means that there's a bodily visitor within a space with an intermediary, which is a screen, a small screen. It would appear to me that it's very important to properly understand what's happening mentally, emotionally for the visitor. So, for example, when I looked at the experience of the Museum d'Orsay, and the screens are located in a corridor where people might be going through, or where there might be noise, for instance, in order to get into the intimity, the really get to grips with Van Gogh, we would have perhaps needed a quieter room. Is there something that we could talk about the studies that have been carried out into the intimate nature of technology and the bond that we can build with it? The general mediation project in any museum thinks about location. For any of you working in that field, I'm sure that you have experienced this, where there's an exhibition that requires a space. So you have to find the right space in the discourse that's developed in terms of the works that we're going to be using. The question of space in museum is a real battle, I guess, a place of discussion and debate in any case. And it comes up a lot every single day with people working around the table, exhibition managers, curators, etc. There's always a lot of debate. In terms of location of the terminal, I would say that it's not optimal in terms of the experience that we're looking for. We're trying to dialogue very intimately with Van Gogh, like you said, but at the same time, we're outside the exhibition in the nef, it's called, in the side of the building, where there are a lot of people passing through. But the fact that it is a place where people are passing through, it means that a lot of people can test the platform, the terminal. Yes, it's not especially comfortable. As I said, people are standing up, so they're opposite the terminal. In this experience, we've not made much effort in terms of the posture and physical installation in order to test this experience, because we're in a specific context as well. Perhaps we didn't have much time as well. We chose to present this experience and to install it as we did. But these conditions are very important, and it's important to study them for every single experience. The posture of the visitor is incredibly important. And to come back to what you were saying about intimacy. Intimacy is not being communicated through the environment, but it's more the questions that we're asking and the responses that we're getting. And the language used for Van Gogh, perhaps I didn't specify this, but there was a lot of work on the language of Van Gogh, as he was not French, but it was written in French. So we were trying to get his way of talking. This was very sensitive in terms of the personality of Van Gogh. Talk about artificial intelligence. So do take this as to caveat, this is actually a machine, but the idea is that the personality may be able to be revealed through this. It's very interesting language in mediation, because this is our aim. If there are any errors in French, it needs to be because they were trying to speak like Van Gogh used to, and not because there's a error in the system. This is not always easy to explain. Would anybody else like to answer this question? You don't have to, but it's open. I founded Artibot, which is a chatbot that guides visitors and promotes curiosity and emotion. I would like to ask a question to Thomas. What is happening with the ministry's database? As all startups, we've connected our solution to the database, but we have realized that it's a real black box. Data and databases are sealed. So could you perhaps tell us a little bit more about the status of databases in France? I do not think that I am perhaps best placed to describe the French Ministry of Culture's status of database, but as a national institution, we do contribute to these databases. We do not currently have a tool for description of our own collections. I mentioned figures earlier. We're between 3 to 5 million objects with 3 to 4 people working on it. So this is a colossal project. So there are a number of issues in terms of platforms. Colleagues in the room will be able to answer your question better. There's a question of infrastructure regarding the database. The infrastructure is quite old. And this raw gold, if you like, requires a lot of work, a lot an amount of work. The French Ministry for Culture is fully committed to this, and we've contributed to work on optimization of existing data in order to have qualitative rather than quantitative data. We worked on a project called European Archaeology, a program that consisted in creating a quality database online, but also in the textual descriptions, but also in the images uploaded as well. This is an important component. If we want to use image recognition capabilities, then we need to have quality images in high resolution. So I think that we could have an entire evening on database construction. We wouldn't be able to get to the end of it. This won't have answered all of your question, but I do know that this is a quality for colleagues at the ministry, for the museum itself, and my colleagues as well. Perhaps other colleagues will be able to help me to answer this question better. And there's an obstacle, yes, with the data that's based on locations. We do have some questions, and I can see that somebody has raised their hand. Shedlia Anabi, if you would like to ask your question, we're listening. Good evening. I'm delighted with this lecture this evening, and I wanted to ask Thomas Sagory at the National Archaeology Museum, is your data available and consultable remotely? Because I come from Tunisia, and we have lots of fragments of Latin inscriptions, for instance, and we know that some inscriptions from these fragments exist in reserves in other museums. Is there a possibility and a research project to access this, to have exchange, to know whether or not there might be fragments of the same inscriptions that we have within your data and within your databases? Yes, as a service of national competence, all of our data is open and available and can be communicated even for sales purposes. This is our position. In terms of inscriptions, I'm not able to answer your question specifically. We have a database of all of our archived documents that could be consulted for this. Earlier, I was talking about Sketchfam for the 3D digitization. One of the challenges at the moment, this is a private initiative, Sketchfam, and we want to be able to distribute our 3D models on platforms, but using open source tools, because viewing these 3D models is essential for both research and other purposes. So within this question, you've already identified the 4 to 5 main points on the French Ministry of Culture's roadmap in terms of their digital strategy. So yes, there is still a lot of work ongoing. Many of us are working on these matters and we're trying to make quick progress, but behind this, there are also a number of issues and projects. We have researchers, but also tools through participatory science where we can work with citizens in order to make quicker progress. But there are only 24 hours in a day, and we would like artificial intelligence to help us go even faster. I would like to come back to this notion of data, as Caroline was saying. In the examples that I gave of the use of AI in order to generate data and promote data, in almost all cases, it's institutions that choose open content for both images and data that supports these images. And once we have these corpora of data and images that can be freely accessed, AI can play its role in establishing links. Stepping off the beaten track, it's quite surprising what they can find. So I think the more AI is developed, the more AI is going to need fuel. And this fuel is going to be, in part, this data and freely accessible data, as Thomas just said, particularly for open content data. I think that these two are really important. Yes, Marie-Hélène, yes, thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you about this as well. Yes, we do know that there is enormous amount of data, but we have identified through our tests that the more information we gave to our chatbot, the more it could make mistakes, in the sense that you've all tested ChatGPT. Sometimes the responses are very elaborated and scientifically proven, even though it's totally false. So we have noticed that the more options for response we gave to our chatbot, the more chances there were that they would answer something that seemed right, but it wasn't. So we have this worry, this concern, which is true for all museums. We want to be very precise. So in the future, we're going to be developing shorter, more punchy sentences in-house and wiki sheets that are fed into by the community that we trust and some of our own colleagues as well. But we have identified that by opening up to worksheets, all database available in the museum and the whole World Wide Web, it can be a bit dangerous, so you do need to be careful. We identified exactly the same thing. In terms of learning, we can reach a peak, and then if we give them more data, then we can actually start losing quality. In terms of image recognition and text, we had to reduce it and focus in on what a corpus that was structured and one for which we could assess the quality. Thank you very much for these different responses on data. So we can see that a corpus of data is important prior to development of AI. We've also seen an issue associated with the quality of data. If we have data that is not sufficiently explicit, then what we talk about garbage in and garbage out in IT, if we put garbage in, we get garbage out. There was a question raised in the chat around data. I would like to come back to discuss this. So if we could just go up the chat a little bit. And there was a question about implementation by the team. Yes, we will focus on professions afterwards, but I just want to continue with data. I'm afraid I cannot hear. There was another question just below that as well. I'm going to read it out. So AI functions with a gigantic quantity of data. What are the counterparts requested by museums from economic partners with which they work for the provision of data, text, sound, or image? Does it have an important value for AI learning generated by private partners? So this is a first question about the monetization, potential monetization of data in order to draw a parallel with what's happening in other creative and industrial sectors, particularly in music, collective rights management companies that are positioning themselves to have an opt-out so that their data is not used for training large models. Some companies have been positioning themselves on this. So economic and business models, this question of representation, and there is not an exemption here of bias. And this can then be reflected within artificial intelligence, particularly in terms of image generation and the algorithms themselves that show a certain number of bias, particularly sexist bias. If we ask for certain, if we're going to ask for a picture of some professions, for instance, it will naturally show a man, even though it is gender neutral. So how can we have these opt-outs? And also a question of representation. Perhaps we can answer this question first in terms of open access data. Thomas, yes, so in the ministry, we wanted to look at reaction in order to enrich available data rather than spending time on identifying the demand. So the idea is to provide access so that then everybody is able to use it regardless. So it's dissociating it. It's not part of negotiation. Our mission is to provide access to as much data of the highest quality possible. And then the uses of that will be determined by those using the data. We had a hand raised online earlier as well. We have a new hand that's raised. Yes, over to you. Shidlia and Abi. Yes, I wanted to come back to this question on accessible data. Do you also put new collections of data online that haven't been published yet? Yes, inside the data, we don't have any hidden objects. Even new acquisitions are published online. A scientific approach is one thing. The documentation of collection is something different, except for legal procedures of traffic of cultural goods, in which case there is a legal proceeding in place requiring confidentiality. In other case, there is no desire to not have a 3D model of an object because it has not been published. Perhaps it will raise the interest of researchers if we do publish this online. So we have programs in place for the digitization of objects linked to the exhibition project and the mediation project, the restoration, acquisition. There's only a few of us in the workshop, so the program is quite small given our human capacity in the face of demand, which is growing for the different fields. But there's also a property rights. You're making this accessible to everybody. There are no different access levels. Everything is accessible to everybody. Yes, except for legal restrictions. So I'm not talking about legal restrictions, but what about scientific restrictions linked to research, an object that's never been studied before, which is then made available to the public? I think we have had an internet cut out, but I think we've understood the general idea.
I haven't got a recent example. When a request is processed, it's generally within the context of a project, and that can be a publication project. So we've got two messages that have come in as we've been talking. So is this to do with the collections around data? Otherwise, we'll move in to another area of questions. So this is to do with observation of heritage. So perhaps we'll move into the questions linked into the professions, because there was a question, I think it was the first question we received, was to do with the impacts on skills. Have you got any feedback from museum employees in terms of the transformation of their professions, in positively or negatively, with regard to opportunities? Yes, I think all of my colleagues working in digital technology would have the same answer. I think it's also an approach when we're deploying digital technologies. We want to ensure that there is acceptance in-house. So, for example, we had an augmented reality project, and we have a young researcher, a specialized sociologist on digital tools, working with us for 6 months, and he carried out guided interviews with members of the staff from the conservation team, the security team, the mediation team, and they talked about the fact that they're often at the interface with visitors. They raised a whole number of questions, and they talked about the negative aspects as well. Marie-Hélène talked about the decision to use an iPad with a single application. If someone installs an application which doesn't work, they're going to talk to the person that's in front of them, and the staff need to know how to respond in this situation. So it's important to take all of this into account. There are positive aspects, of course, because it's a tool for sharing, but of course there are some negative challenges that need to be taken into account in discussions. The fact that you're going to involve staff in test phases, that's a way of talking together and feeding back information. That's part of the process. Marie-Hélène? Yes, indeed. I was going to say that in the test phases, there are, of course, our employees as well as the visitors, but at no point in our chatbot project did we want to replace human beings or replace guides who are there in the museum. I think there is a desire for guided tours and a need for that. And the first thing that we wanted to do was to reassure our teams. But whenever there's an innovative project, you always have to do change management. In terms of 3D digitization of our collections, the whole team needed expertise in photogrammetry, in laser tools, and there's always changes that need to be accompanied. And so it's important to work on acceptance and reassuring the teams about the fact that things are going to change, but they're going to actually change for the better. Thank you. Is this something that has been raised within your teams? Yes, like any digital technology which is transforming all professions, it raises questions internally, of course, where there's digital questions. People come and see us and they ask whether we really should use ChatGPT and whether it's useful or not. So we often think about these kind of questions when we present projects to the public. There is also internal work that needs to be done in terms of raising awareness, explaining to people why we're doing whatever we're doing, and more generally, this area of artificial intelligence is something that we're looking at from a professional perspective. Like a lot of people are thinking about, in a number of different professions, how we can put in place training, how we can put in place times for sharing where colleagues come and present a project linked to architecture, a work, or reception of visitors. And we've got an internal artificial intelligence project where we're seeking to present these kind of new technologies. It's about sharing. But in terms of all these new digital uses, we need to offer support to our colleagues. And this question goes beyond pure technology because it really raises questions about the transformation of our professions. But it's something that will happen over the next years, over the coming years. It's going to be part of what we're doing as an institution. Thank you for these questions. There's a question here in the room at the back of the room. Good evening. I'm Alban François from Guimet Museum. Thank you very much for this presentation. I was really interested in the Van Gogh project, which really is something a bit Harry Potter-ish in that. And I think also in terms of the emotions, I think there's real future in developing cultural mediation around artificial intelligence tools like this. So my question has perhaps already been raised a couple of times, but I'm really enthusiastic about all this, but really also quite scared by all of this. But I think in terms of structuring of data, this is something that costs the taxpayer and state a lot. It doesn't cost a lot for people who reuse this data. So I think there is a real question about how museums and the Ministry of Culture is going to ensure the value of this production, which takes time. And also our professions are being transformed. And that scares me a lot as well, because we're really at the beginning of this. Everyone's very enthusiastic about it. Everyone's really thinking how amazing it is, but I'm a little bit concerned that the ease with which a robot can be managed from an HR perspective would tempt our leaders and managers to replace human beings by robots that have no feelings, that don't go on strike, that are not paid, and that don't complain to visitors who haven't enjoyed their visit. So how do you think we can avoid that? How can we avoid replacing staff through AI, whether it's reception staff, security staff, or the staff writing the nameplates for works? Thank you for what you've said. There's a lot in what you've said. There's the question of data and how easy we can recover this data. There's these big models that have been developed through scrapping. So these are robots that go through websites and automatically recover data to bring them into these databases. There's the question of transformation of professions, and you're raising this question that from a technical and technological perspective, we can do a lot of things, but what are the ethical limits that we want to set in as museum professionals? So I don't know if other people want to say something around these ethical aspects. Perhaps refer to the panel here with me. Are these questions that have been raised internally at different times during your projects? Do you have any feedback from your experience here? So I'm not going to be able to respond with regard to my institution, but personally, I'm not really worried about the fact that AI is going to replace professions, because I think for decades already we've been saying that technology will replace human beings, but that doesn't happen. Maybe it should have done. That might have been better in some areas. I think AI is going to be a tool in the same way that the mobile phone is a tool that we can't do without today. And people can no longer remember telephone numbers because we're always carrying them with us. I think there are things that we will do differently. AI is going to be a tool to help and support creation. It's not going to replace creation, but it's going to be a tool to support the creation of text, of images, of projects. It's going to help modeling things. I don't think we need to be worried about it. I don't think we need to imagine that Vincent, our terminal, Vincent, I don't think it's going to replace cultural mediation. It's not the same thing. What we can see in our visitor surveys, and this is something that's really interesting in terms of cultural mediation, when we ask people what they want in terms of cultural mediation. They want everything. They want text, audio, audio guides, podcasts, videos, interactive terminals. They want everything. Not everybody wants everything, but when you look across all of our different visitors, we need something for everyone. And so these new approaches to mediation don't replace human beings, because one of the needs for people is to be able to visitors is be able to talk to real people. But these AI tools add something else. What I think is interesting with this Bonjour Vincent project is that it helps people to ask their questions indirectly to the artist. Of course, this is an artificial intelligence tool based on a database of the knowledge of the artist. That's how we explain what it is, but it's about turning the approach around and helping people to ask questions. But it doesn't replace a guided tour for people who want that. It doesn't replace audio guides or projections within the exhibition. And of course, it doesn't replace the experience of seeing the real works. We can really reassure the scientific teams around this. So in terms of replacing professions, I really don't believe it's going to do that. And even technical teams, I don't think that's going to happen. That's my personal opinion. Marie-Hélène, perhaps you have something to say very quickly. I think what's just been said is really excellent. I think we create so much more content than we've ever created. So actually, this requires lots of people to create this content and to develop these projects. So I don't think there's just going to be one person who's going to be in charge of cultural mediation. I think actually AI creates jobs. So the question, of course, is whether we take the blue pill or the red pill. I just want to respond to what the person was saying about visitors. There's experience that we've had in museums where the staff person is present who produces the plates for the works, but the museum wanted to use AI to simplify some of the text and make them easier to understand, and also make them available with languages that are less frequent. So the museum didn't have the funds to pay a translation from a translation company. So they tested ChatGPT to do this. So it really is an amazing tool. So they developed this. They used ChatGPT to do this. They checked the translation, but the experience that they had would never have been put in place without ChatGPT. No profession lost out. No one was replaced through this tool, but it simply improved everybody's work. And it is a way of transforming the experience of the visitors. Thank you for everything you said. So I'm having to keep an eye on the time. We've taken 32 minutes to have this discussion. I'm afraid we haven't been able to cover all of the issues, and particularly the environmental questions that were raised in the chat, and those are really important as well. And there was also this question with regard to the Ministry of Culture and how the public authorities are going to be able to accompany these questions. But this is something that you'll be able to express at the end of the session through an online consultation, which will be available also for people here in the room. But before we get to that, we'd like to hand over to Séverine Blenner-Michel, who's going to just do the summary of what we've heard. I'd just like us to applaud our different speakers, as they've really done an excellent job, and it's really been very interesting. So, can you hear? So this is perhaps not the most straightforward aspect of the evening, because when you've had such a broad and wealthy experience, throughout this evening. It's difficult to bring it all together without really having the time to think it through peacefully. It's difficult to bring it all together, but I'm going to try and give you a summary, a review of what we've heard tonight, and I'm going to give you more of an overview of what's been said rather than a conclusion. I think there's probably been a number of questions that have not been answered, and there's probably a number of questions that have been raised, and a whole range of challenges that we continue to face, and then some real challenges that we could offer hope for the future as well. But nevertheless, a number of questions. I'd also just like personally to say thank you to all the speakers who've contributed to this evening's debate. I think it really has been a debate because it's a slightly new approach together with the organizers of this event. We wanted to make sure that there was enough time for there to be questions from the room and questions from Zoom as well. I'm delighted that everyone has been involved, and thank you to the speakers who've introduced us into this question of artificial intelligence. First of all, Marion Carré, who provided this introduction and moderated our discussions and has really helped us, of course, to identify the right speakers for this evening. These are people you've already worked with, and you've talked a lot with these people already, and that's what gave real meaning to everything we've been talking about. So thank you as well to Pierre-Yves Lochon, who gave us this historical perspective and this introduction to artificial intelligence in the world of museums. Thank you to Agnès Abastado, to Thomas Sagory, and also to Marie-Hélène, who have all and she talked to us about what was going on in Canada. Although we understood through these different examples that artificial intelligence by nature breaks down geographical boundaries and other boundaries, and I think that's an important aspect. We initiated this evening we mentioned at the beginning, since January 2020, we started a new formula which brings together the remote approach and also people here in the room. That there's a good number of us here in the auditorium and a number on Zoom as well. And I hope this new format will encourage people to continue to take part in these events in person. I don't know how many people were connected in Zoom, but I think we had over 200 people that have been connected. So this has helped us to reach a broader audience. Thank you to all of the teams from ICOM, Emilie, Girard, the president, Anne-Claude Maurice, and Alexia McKinney, who have supervised with the teams from the auditorium here the technical aspects of this hybrid evening, and for the INP, Emily Moum, who's with us and responsible for scientific work, and also Charles Personnaz, who introduced this evening. And then, of course, we particularly want to thank the translation teams who've made it possible for colleagues from other nationalities and other languages to follow our discussions this evening. So what can we withdraw from this evening? I have to say I am a newcomer to these questions, and I've learned a lot about artificial intelligence and how it can be used professionally and how it can help museums fulfill their missions. What is artificial intelligence? Marie-Hélène Carré gave us the historical perspective on that. I won't go back over that, but what I really have learned is that the first definition of artificial intelligence was given in the 1950s with this idea of the development of IT programs that could carry out tasks reserved for human beings, which on the basis of varied techniques, can be used to generate text, images, sound, speech, and videos as well on the basis of this generative artificial intelligence on the basis of big databases that can change foundation models, which a range of applications are laid on top of. In this way, artificial intelligence, these artificial intelligence tools mean that we don't need particular skills with regard to programming skills, etc., to use them. But this doesn't mean that in terms of this intuitive or experimental approach, it doesn't mean that we necessarily can perceive what's going to modify the profession of museum or different museum professions, or adapt the life of museums. The examples given this evening have drawn out a number of different points which I think are interesting, including this link between artificial intelligence and museums. The first aspect is the recent development of these systems and their very rapid evolution. I would say it's recent because the Foundation Astronaut put in place their objective of to prepare visitors for museums through chatbots in 2017. And this was a first chatbot with cultural recommendations. These first chatbots were used for cultural mediation, for helping and supporting visits. They were tested in a number of different museums, particularly in South America, and then they were gradually replaced by more sophisticated tools. Pierre-Yves Lochon talked about these different examples with different approaches to reception in the Dali Museum in Florida through this Dali Lives application, which makes it possible for visitors to meet Salvador Dali.
These various tools that are rapidly developing and taking on more and more sophisticated forms that allow us to communicate on more difficult subjects, such as around slavery or the Holocaust, which were mentioned as examples. The second interesting point on artificial intelligence is the use on intelligence and collections. A number of examples were given for this knowledge and also for the promotion of collections through the links that can be established between collections from different museums. You mentioned collections from the Met Museum, for instance, and it's a way of merging the collections of different museums in order to find links between them. Digitization also gives us access to data, which is particularly what the National Archaeological Museum is doing, with this desire to give access to very large collections of over 3 million objects, as our speaker reminded us, and also to connect these collections back up with their place of identification, their place of discovery, and their place of current conservation, the National Archaeological Museum, in order to discover the object and also look back over the history of this object. So artificial intelligence is a means of recontextualizing for people researching collections. The third point that I identified was the new public approaches and new mediation approaches tested through artificial intelligence, with always this objective to create bonds and links. We saw about creating links between collections, but also creating links between members of the public and I think the concept of public in general, I think, is very interesting. The first experiments through chatbots were able to raise a number of repetitive questions, but it is clear that recently tested systems such as Marie-Hélène Raymond in Montreal, in Quebec, sorry, shows that it's going beyond this simple question answer with members of the public and the museum. Through the organization of personalized visits, artificial intelligence is used here in order to personalize and diversify museum experience. By drawing on sensitive experiences, I really liked what Marie-Hélène Raymond said around inspiration on the exhibition of morals in order to work on new forms and approaches to the museums that are more sensitive and different in order to complement other forms of mediation, guided tours, for instance, which you mentioned, and these will not be disappearing anytime soon. The fourth point that I think is important is the experimental nature that still remains for all of these tools and the permanent link that museums and heritage institutions maintain with the world of research. Thomas reminded us, Thomas Sagory, since 2018, there have been a number of new systems using artificial intelligence with research programs behind it, PhD projects, and teams working to compile data and think about the formatting required so that these applications can meet the objectives that have been set. You also mentioned this research project in the fight against the traffic of cultural goods, projects for virtual reconstitution of destroyed heritage or non-existent heritage that no longer exists, or in order to fill in the gaps through digitization processes that are increasingly complex, including current practices in the Musée d'Orsay through the Van Gogh exhibition with researchers working on the letters of Vincent van Gogh, so that this application can propose answers that would be as close as possible to what the painter would have said. The idea is to move from academic to more applied research. I think that this is very interesting when talking about the relationship with the public. We do need to inform them of the experimental nature and include them in the approach. Beyond welcoming and exchanging with the public, we're including them in an experimental approach, introducing thereby a development and perfecting dynamic in order to hone artificial intelligence tools. A number of questions were raised this evening about the impact on professions and practical professional practice. One thing that I think is important is the diversification of skills within our museums. And it was interesting to see the careers of our different speakers this evening. They're not professionals of collections, they're digital strategists and digital project leaders. So through artificial intelligence, it is becoming necessary to open up exchange and to encourage exchange between those who are involved in practice of cultural and heritage conservation and those skilled in data management and data processing, with a knowledge that's increasing through exchanges and through promoting and better disseminating this knowledge. Another aspect mentioned was the ethical nature, with risks in terms of credibility of museums, which feeds into this question of reliability of data. And this answers our first question, because there can only be a good application of artificial intelligence if the data used is produced by professionals who know the collections well, in order to improve the depth of knowledge on these collections through AI. A final point that I think is essential, and at the French National Heritage Institute, this is key. It's about the notion of training within artificial intelligence, the training of conservation professionals in the opportunities opened by artificial intelligence, and how they will be working with artificial intelligence and also helping feed into it in order to facilitate the use of these applications and improve their reliability. The question of artificial intelligence, which for many here is close to this notion of virtual reality, with this possibility of giving access to what long seemed inaccessible. It allows us to travel in time and space through the collections in order to access places that seemed forbidden or impossible to access. This raises a number of issues, geopolitical issues, excessive visitor numbers. And so we're looking for new models and new practices to tackle these issues. And I think that this is particularly interesting. And one final point that was not discussed, but which I thought was really interesting. I read an interview with the European Member of Parliament saying that artificial intelligence remains a black spot in terms of law and culture. So there's this question of how to frame artificial intelligence, particularly in terms of content capture promoted by all of the artificial intelligence tools. This is a real challenge for our generation and also for our legislators. At a broader scale than just France or the European Union more generally, in a field such as culture, where European institutions have no competence, we need to be able to better supervise artificial intelligence, and we need to protect property rights. And I feel that this is essential for us to raise awareness and be attentive. This raises the question of training once again. So there are a lot of questions that remain open for debate. And I do not think we necessarily have the answers, but they highlight the number of possibilities opened for us by artificial intelligence for our professions, for dissemination, for our collections, and the sharing of best practice and knowledge in the field of culture more generally. So once again, I would like to thank everybody who has supported us in opening up these horizons and perhaps helping to sketch out the outlines and the possibilities offered by artificial intelligence that give us, that really make us want to go further into this topic. I'm sure that it will come up again in the future. And a big thank you to the ICOM team for proposing this as a topic in your evening debate sessions. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much. To finish, I would just like to say two things about the consultation that I just mentioned. This will be an excellent conclusion. We believed that we were not going to be able to discuss all questions that we had. We had over 200 people connected online as well. And we thought that a consultation format would be appropriate. You can see a QR code on the screen. And this will be a way of you giving feedback on the status of your institution with regard to AI, how far along you are in reflection, the projects that have already been rolled out, or the projects that you don't want to roll out if you don't want to have any AI. This is going to give us quantitative data that will be presented in the summary. Obstacles that you can identify in the deployment of AI projects, budget, for instance, and in the chat, there were some questions that we were unable to address that mentioned the lack of user cases, and we hope that we'll be able to talk more about skills. We just heard about training professions. You'll see this online. I'm not going to read out all of the questions, but oh, I'm sorry, this is not the right QR code. Here we go. We have the right QR codes now, and there's one per language, and you can choose your questionnaire. There's a question of departments in which AI seems the most promising with different options, and then finally open questions to express your viewpoints, the questions of concerns related to AI in museums. So please do share your opinion. And then finally, a question of specific needs regarding AI. This is a very broad question intentionally, but it's going to give you an opportunity to think about that with regard to the public authorities, with regard to ICOM, why not? So please do answer these surveys online. It will be open over the next few days to give you time to respond. This conference session will be available online, and then the summary of this session will include the results of this survey. Thank you very much. Have an excellent evening. I would just like to say goodbye and see you again next year. We'll be preparing 3 ethics debate evenings over 2024. We will be keeping you informed online and via our social media. Thank you all for your presence with us this evening. Good evening.